Hi and welcome to Windswept Brewing Company's third Friday night tasting of our beers. My name is Nigel Tiddy. I'm one of the owners of the brewery, and we've been going since 2012, set up by myself and Al Reid, and we're a tiny little brewery up on the north coast of Scotland in a place called Lossiemouth, where it is a beautiful day at the moment. It's clear blue skies. It's a shame we can't all be down the beach getting in the water for a surf. Tonight we are going to talk about Wolf. Wolf is one of the beers we have been brewing right from the very start. It is a 6% dark, strong Scottish style ale. First actually brewed just over there in my garage in about 2010, early 2010, when I was playing with whole grain brewing and sort of learning quite a lot about the brewing game. My plan was to make Thigston's All Peculiar. I had a recipe for it, but I didn't have the right ingredients. So instead, what I did was I changed the ingredients a little bit, and the result was the Wolf, which as I say, we started brewing right from the start. Was one of our first three beers, the three planned beers, along with Blonde and Tornado, in 2012, 13, early 13. So we first brewed this actually in 2013. It was January 2013. We first brewed the Wolf, and pretty much since then it's been a serial award winner. Currently, first one, its first award in October 2013. SEBA, it was the Old Ale champion there for cask. It is currently, and I'll read these out, Scottish Camera Old Ale champion in cask. It is the SEBA cask UK Dark Beers champion, and it also won overall cask excuse me, at the SEBA National Awards this year in silver. So they got a silver overall for all the cask beers that were judged at the SEBA event in March this year, just before the pubs all shut, which is a bit of a shame. Obviously, it's all about timing, I guess. But really been a solid beer for us at Windswept. Very popular. It's got a really strong following. So, without much more ado, what is it? It's a 6% dark Scottish ale, so akin to an 80, 90 shilling, somewhere in between those two, really. If you know that old money. Nice bit of carbonation on this one, and let's see how it pours. So nice, lovely, creamy, smooth head there. You can see the beer, it's very dark, and that comes from the chocolate malt we put in there. But it's not a stout. You can actually sort of see through it if you hold it up to the light wherever you are. You'll be able to see through it, and it's like a dark purpley colour, really, rather than it being opaque. So it's not a stout. It's not really a porter, but it's a lovely dark colour. It's got that nice, you see that purple hue at the bottom there, and a nice sort of creamy white head. Smells of chocolate, coffee, really strong. I get strong chocolate and coffee flavours from this. Delicious, great, lovely winter beer, cold winter evenings. Maybe not. Then again, it's good any time, to be honest. And it's got a lovely, smooth, lovely and smooth mouthfeel. Quite easily sits down, quite creamy. Yeah, quite. I get coffee, a lot of sort of espresso coffee flavour there, a bit of the chocolate coming through, and it finishes. It's got a little bit of sweetness in there. So the fermentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the making of this in a second, but we stop the fermentation quite with quite a lot of sugar left in the beer, so the gravity is still relatively high. So there's some nice complex sugars in there which give it that nice little bit of sweetness, and they help with the mouthfeel as well. So it's got a lovely smooth mouthfeel. It's got that little bit of sweetness, and mixed with the bitterness and the sort of roast bitterness from the hops. I get a sort of bonfire toffee sort of flavour, that dark burnt toffee flavour at the end. Brilliant. So people ask me what my favourites. I made this one, so clearly it is a bit of a favourite of mine. I do enjoy it. I like my dark beers. I err towards those beers mostly if I'm going to go out for a beer. I just love the roast flavours you get, and the complexity of it. Sort of all that coffee and chocolate, they're all flavours I like, bitterness. So my favourite of mine, really, I guess, this one. So why do we call it Wolf? I hear you all cry. The Wolf of Badenoch is a local sort of anti-hero, I don't know what you call him. He lived in late 1300s. He's the king's brother, and he lived on Lochindorb, which is about 10-15 miles away from Lossiemouth and Elgin. And he had a few issues, you might say. He was it's a long story, but he was basically excommunicated because he divorced his wife, and you weren't allowed to do that sort of thing without the Pope say so. So the Pope excommunicated him, and his brother, who was the bishop, I suppose he was, of Elgin Cathedral, he had to send the Wolf the paperwork that said you've been excommunicated. So he got his rider to go off and take him the missive. The bishop ran off to Spiny Palace, which was the only thing that the king had said to the Wolf of Badenoch that he wasn't allowed to touch, so he knew he'd be safe there. The Wolf got the excommunication notice and raised his army, marched on Elgin, burning everything in his way, and then ransacked Elgin and burnt down Elgin Cathedral. So a bit of a dark story, and the ruins of Elgin Cathedral, if you've never been to Elgin, they're still there, and they are still a ruin. That was all thanks to the Wolf of Badenoch, who, as I say, he had a few issues, and we've named a beer after him now. So here's to, and there's a little statue gone up actually in Elgin as well, to remember his deeds, and quite a colourful character in the history of the area. So that's why we called it Wolf. I'm going to have another drink. I'm enjoying this very much. So a bit about brewing it then. I've got here, here's one I made earlier, and so these are the grains we use for this beer. I'll just point to them. Pale malt, crystal malt, and chocolate malt. The pale malt forms the base of all our beers and all beer, really. Malted barley, basically, so that the reason it's malted is so that it's ready for all the starch in there to be converted by the enzymes into sugar, which is what we want. We want the sugar so we can turn the sugar into alcohol. And the base of all beer is going to be the pale malt here, and that's basically where we get all our alcohol from. The crystal malt is roasted. It's roasted slightly when it's been wetted a little bit, so you get a nice caramelization of some of the sugars that are in there, and it's sort of quite nutty flavour. It gives colour and a bit of flavour to a beer. And then the chocolate malt, that's roasted longer and hotter, and it's not wet when it's roasted either. And you get these lovely, well, you get clearly the lovely colour and great sort of chocolate, bitter chocolate and coffee aromas and flavours from it. And clearly, when you look at the beer, that's where we get the colour from. But it's slightly misleading. So I've got a recipe here. The whole grain bill for a Wolf, 1,600 litres we brew at a time, and the grain bill is about 437 kilos. So just under half a ton of malted barley. Nearly all this, so 90. What is it? So 90. Stuart very kindly worked these out for me. Just over 91% is pale malt. We've got about 5%, 5 to 6% of crystal, and we've got about that much chocolate. So it's 2.8%, relatively small amount of chocolate, but it gives that great colour, and it gives a lot of that flavour as well. So yes, we'll get a little bit from the crystal, but really this has got such powerful flavours and aromas in it that it adds all that fantastic complexity to the product, which is great. So a very simple beer, actually. Just the three grains. We get the sugars out. We mash it around about at 66 degrees. So we'll get a lot of sugar from this. So we end up with what we call wort, and that goes through into the kettle. And it'll be a gravity, and the gravity when it goes into the kettle is going to be about 1062. Gravity is measured with a hydrometer, which I haven't got here actually. I'll bring one next week and show you. And a hydrometer, you drop it into the liquid and it floats depending on how much sugar is in there. So you can work out how much sugar is in there with a hydrometer we've got. Just have a quick look at these. So basically, it goes into the boil, and once it's been boiling for a little while, we add some hops. So we had hops at the start of the boil to give us bitterness, and then we had hops at the end of the boil to give us flavour and aroma. And we use all British hops in the Wolf. We've got some Admiral, we've got East Kent Goldings, we've got Fuggles, and we use them they just added to the boil. There's no dry hopping afterwards or anything like that. So it's quite a traditional British style of beer in the way that it is brewed and in its flavour profile, really. So we boil for about an hour and a half. It's 80 minutes actually, and then we take it through into the fermenter. It goes through a little heat exchanger, which we get all the hot water back so we can brew the next day. And then once we have got it into the fermenter, yeast is added, and for this beer, so we use different yeasts for all our beers, pretty much. We have standard yeast that we use. This uses an English ale yeast because it suits the flavour profile, which is quite malty, a little bit sweet. So the English ale yeast we use, it's pretty good at fermenting, but it won't ferment all the sugars, so it sort of gets tired, really. It's quite a strong beer. So it struggles to take to metabolize out all the sugars, which is why we end up with that sweetness at the end of it. And it'll take around about 4 days for the fermentation process to complete. And once it's complete and we're getting close to the final gravity that we want, we drop the temperature and we will slow down the action of the yeast. It actually changes the way that it works, and it starts to clean up some flavours that we don't want in the product. We give it a day or two to do a bit of that at 14 degrees, and then we drop it again, temperature down to 7 degrees, and then we shut up the tank and we let it sit for a couple of weeks. And the yeast works away and the beer flavours develop over that time. And with a dark beer, you don't want to rush this. We want to give it time for all those flavours to develop. Once we're happy, we can move it into vessel and take it across either to bottle or to cask and keg. I will finish tonight with, again, and there are a lot of people out there who are working very hard to keep us all safe and healthy. So I'm going to say cheers to all the NHS and essential workers that are busy out there working hard to keep safe, and I wish you all a great weekend, and we'll hopefully see you next week, where we will have Hurricane for a tasting at the same time next Friday.